I never thought a single sentence could change the way I was seen by my own family. But that night it did. The wedding had ended only an hour earlier. We were back at my parents' house in Sacramento, still dressed in clothes that smelled faintly of wine and late summer air from Napa Valley. Plates were stacked on the counter, half-empty glasses sat forgotten on side tables. Everyone looked tired in the satisfied way people do after a long celebration. I remember thinking that despite the chaos, the day had gone well. Emily had looked beautiful. The guests had been happy. I believed I had done my part. I was standing near the kitchen doorway when Emily walked into the dining room. Something about her posture made the room feel smaller. She was very still, almost stiff, like someone bracing themselves before stepping into cold water. My mother noticed it too. Margaret straightened her back and set her glass down as if she already knew what was coming. Emily cleared her throat. Her voice sounded tight, rehearsed in a way that made my stomach turn. She said that something was wrong. She said the wedding money was gone, all of it, the cards, the envelopes, the cash our friends and relatives had given her. At first, no one spoke. We all waited for the rest of the sentence, the part where she would explain there had been a mistake, or that the venue was double-checking, or that it would be found in the morning. Instead, she looked straight at me. She said my name. She said I was the only one who had access to the gift table and the room where the envelopes were kept. She said she trusted me, and that trust had been broken. The words hung in the air longer than they should have. I remember noticing the hum of the refrigerator, the faint clink of a spoon settling in a cup. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, not because I did not know what to say, but because I could feel the room deciding something without me. My father shifted in his chair and frowned. My mother did not look at me at all. Her eyes stayed on Emily, full of concern and a strange kind of resolve. It was the look she used to wear when she believed she needed to fix something before it became embarrassing. I finally found my voice and said that it was not true. I said there had to be another explanation. I said I locked the room and handed the key to the coordinator, just like we had planned. My words sounded thin, almost distant, even to me. No one asked a question. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the accusation, but the silence that followed it. No one asked when I had last been there. No one asked who else might have had access. No one suggested waiting until morning. They accepted Emily's story as if it had already been proven. My mother finally spoke. She said that this was not the time for arguments. She said the family needed honesty, not defensiveness. She said she was disappointed. I looked at her then, really looked at her, waiting for some sign that she was still my mother, that she still knew me. What I saw instead was someone who had already made up her mind, someone who believed that protecting the family image mattered more than questioning a painful story. I tried again. I said I would never do that to Emily. I said I had spent months helping her plan this wedding. I said she knew me better than that. Emily started to cry, not loud sobs, just enough to make my mother reach for her hand. That small gesture sealed everything. In that moment, I understood that this was no longer about facts. It was about who appeared hurt and who appeared guilty. I felt something inside me go very quiet. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse her back. I did not beg them to believe me. I stood there, listening to the way my name was suddenly spoken with disappointment instead of familiarity. I watched my parents avoid my eyes. I felt myself being pushed out of a circle I had always assumed was permanent. After a few minutes that felt much longer, I picked up my purse. I said I was leaving. No one stopped me. As I stepped outside, the night air felt cooler than it had earlier. My phone buzzed in my hand before I even reached my car. A message from the family group chat had already appeared. Emily had posted. She wrote about betrayal, about heartbreak, about how the worst wounds came from the people you trusted most. By the time I drove away, there were replies, words of sympathy, messages telling her to stay strong, silence where my name should have been defended. I drove home in a haze. The streets were empty, the kind of quiet that makes you notice every red light, every turn. When I reached my house, I sat in the driveway longer than usual. I could not bring myself to go inside just yet. The reality of what had happened was settling in slowly, like a heavy blanket. I had walked into that house as a sister who helped make a wedding happen. I had walked out as someone my family believed was capable of stealing. Inside, my phone continued to buzz. More messages. Some people blocked me outright. Others said nothing at all. That silence felt worse than anger. I replayed the evening over and over in my mind, searching for the moment I should have spoken differently, the sentence that might have changed everything, but the truth was uncomfortable and clear. They had not been waiting for an explanation. They had been waiting for someone to blame. When I finally went inside, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked older than it had that morning. Not just tired, but altered, as if something essential had shifted. I thought about my mother, about how quickly she had chosen a side. I thought about all the years I had been the reliable one, the steady one, the daughter who caused no trouble. I wondered how easily that image had been replaced. That night, I did not sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily standing in that dining room, saying my name with certainty. I heard my mother's voice telling me she was disappointed. I felt the weight of a family deciding who I was without asking me a single question. By morning, one thing was painfully clear. Whatever had happened at that wedding, whatever story was being told about me now, the truth alone was not going to fix it. Something had already broken, and I could feel that my life had quietly shifted onto a path I had never expected to walk. By the next morning, the silence had grown heavier instead of fading. I woke up with my phone still in my hand, the screen dark, my fingers stiff as if I had been holding it through the night. For a few seconds, I let myself pretend that everything was normal, that I was just tired from a long weekend in Napa Valley. Then the memory settled back into place, clear and sharp, and my chest tightened all over again. I checked the family group chat before I even got out of bed. There were new messages, more sympathy for Emily, more talk about how shocking it was when someone you trusted revealed their true character. No one asked where I was. No one asked how I was holding up. My name appeared only once, buried in a sentence about disappointment. I typed a reply and erased it. Then I typed another and erased that too. Anything I said would sound like an excuse. I could feel that already. The story had been decided, and I was not part of the conversation anymore. Around mid-morning, my phone rang. When I saw my mother's name on the screen, my heart jumped in a way that surprised me. A small, foolish part of me still hoped she was calling to say there had been a mistake. Her voice was calm, almost formal. She asked if I was home. I said yes. She told me we needed to talk. Not asked, needed. I waited for her to continue, for some sign of concern, but instead she said she did not understand why I had not told the truth the night before. She said the situation was already bad enough without me making it worse. She said people were talking, pal, and that made everything more complicated. I tried to explain again. I told her I had not taken anything. I told her there had to be another explanation. I reminded her of how carefully everything had been handled. My words seemed to disappear into the space between us. She said that Emily was devastated. She said a bride did not lie about something like this. She said she could not imagine why Emily would make it up. What about me? I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it. There was a pause, long enough to tell me exactly where I stood. She said she loved me. Of course she did. But this was not about love. This was about honesty and accountability. This was about protecting the family from further embarrassment. That word stayed with me after the call ended. Embarrassment, not truth, not fairness, embarrassment. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the wood grain as if it might rearrange itself into an answer. I thought about all the times I had smoothed things over for my family, the times I had stayed quiet to keep the peace. I had always believed that reliability counted for something, that history mattered. By afternoon, messages started coming in from relatives I had not heard from in years. Some were awkward, carefully worded, others were blunt, telling me how disappointed they were, how they expected better from me. A few said nothing at all, which somehow hurt more. Emily did not contact me directly. She did not need to. Her version of events was already everywhere. In one message, she wrote about how betrayal cut deeper when it came from blood. In another, she thanked everyone for their support during the hardest moment of her life. I noticed how often my mother responded to those messages. Little comments of reassurance, hearts, words about staying strong. Each one felt like another door quietly closing. That evening, I tried to distract myself by folding laundry, cleaning counters that were already clean, doing anything that kept my hands busy. But my mind kept drifting back to my mother's face in that dining room, the way she had not even looked at me before deciding where she stood. Growing up, I had been the easy child. I did well in school, stayed out of trouble, paid my bills on time. Emily was different, louder, more impulsive. My parents worried about her more, defended her more. I had never resented that. I thought that was just how families worked. Now I wondered if being easy had simply made me expendable. That night, my phone buzzed again. Another message from my mother. She said the family needed space to process what had happened. She said it would be best if I did not reach out to Emily right now. She said we would talk again when emotions had settled. I read the message twice. There was no question of whether I needed space, only whether my presence would be inconvenient. I did not reply. The next few days blurred together. I went through the motions of my routines: grocery shopping, walking around the block, making coffee I barely tasted. Everywhere I went, I felt a low hum of unease, as if the world had tilted slightly and I was still adjusting to the angle. On the third day, I heard from my mother again. This time, she asked if I had thought about what I needed to say to make things right. The phrasing struck me, not what had happened, not what the truth was, what I needed to say. I told her I had nothing to confess. She sighed. I could picture her doing it, the way she always did when she thought I was being stubborn. She said she did not want to lose me, but she could not ignore what everyone believed to be true. She said families survived by standing together, not by questioning each other in public. After we hung up, I felt something shift inside me. It was not anger. It was clarity. For the first time, I understood that this was not just about Emily accusing me. It was about my mother choosing a version of events that felt safer to her, a version where the family image stayed intact, where the problem could be contained and blamed on one person. And that person was me. That realization hurt in a way I had never experienced before. It was quieter than rage, deeper than sadness. It was the understanding that the place I thought I held in my family was more fragile than I had ever known. That evening, I sat alone on my back porch as the sun went down. The air was warm, the neighborhood quiet. I thought about all the years ahead of me, about what it would mean to keep trying to prove myself to people who had already decided who I was. I did not know yet what I was going to do. I did not have a plan. All I knew was that waiting for my mother to change her mind was not going to save me. Somewhere between the sound of the crickets and the fading light, I accepted a difficult truth. If I wanted to survive what was happening, I would have to stop hoping that someone else would fix it. Whatever came next would have to start with me. Once I stopped waiting for someone else to step in, my mind began drifting back to the wedding day itself, not as a blur of emotion, but as a sequence of details that refused to change no matter how often I replayed them. That Saturday morning in Napa Valley had started early. I remember waking before my alarm, the soft light just beginning to seep through the curtains of the small hotel room I had booked months in advance. My feet already ached before I even stood up, the familiar ache of someone who had spent weeks running errands, answering questions, making sure nothing fell apart. I told myself it would all be worth it once Emily walked down the aisle. By 8 o'clock, I was at the venue. The vineyard was quiet then, rows of greens stretching out under a pale sky. Staff members moved with clipboards and coffee cups, calling out instructions. Emily arrived shortly after, already tense, already scanning the room for anything out of place. She asked me to check her veil, then her shoes, then the seating chart, then the gift table again. I did it all without complaint. I had been the one she trusted with the details. She had said that herself. She said she needed someone reliable, someone who would not make it about themselves. I remember feeling a small, careful pride in that. During the ceremony, I stood off to the side, bouquet in hand, watching Emily walk toward the altar. For a moment, everything felt simple. Guests smiled. Music drifted through the air. When the vows were exchanged, I felt a tightness in my chest that surprised me. Not jealousy, just the hope that maybe this day would bring us closer. The reception unfolded exactly as planned. Glasses clinked. Laughter echoed under the lights strung across the courtyard. My main responsibility once the speeches began was the gift area. It was a small room just off the main space, designated by the venue as secure. Cards and envelopes were placed neatly on a long table. I stood nearby, greeting guests, directing them when needed. Nothing about it felt chaotic. No one lingered too long. No one wandered in without reason. Near the end of the night, I stepped into the room alone, counted the remaining cards, checked that everything was where it should be. I locked the door, just as I had been instructed, and handed the key to the coordinator. I remember the feel of the metal against my palm, the brief nod she gave me when she took it. That was the last time I saw the gift room. Thinking back on it now, I realized how calm I had been. There was no rush, no confusion. If there had been even a moment of doubt, I would have remembered it. Instead, all I remembered was relief, the sense that my part was done. That certainty was what made the accusations so jarring. The story Emily told did not match the reality I knew so well, and yet the family had accepted it without hesitation. Sitting alone days later, I laid those memories out like pieces on a table. Each one fit cleanly. There were no gaps, no shadows, and that was when another thought began to form, quieter but harder to ignore. If the events themselves made sense, then the problem was not what happened. It was how the story was being used. I thought about Emily's voice that night, not panicked, not confused, but firm, certain. I thought about the timing, how she waited until we were all together, until no one wanted to disrupt the fragile afterglow of a wedding. I thought about how quickly my mother had stepped in to control the situation, to keep it from spreading. None of it felt accidental anymore. I began to wonder when the idea had taken shape. Not the accusation itself, but the willingness to make it. Had Emily gone into that evening already prepared to say my name, or had she simply realized how easy it would be? The more I asked myself those questions, the more uncomfortable the answers became. That afternoon, I took a walk around my neighborhood, the familiar streets offering a kind of steady comfort. I passed houses I had seen for years, people tending gardens, children riding bikes. Life moved on, untouched by the small implosion happening inside me. As I walked, I realized something else. No one in my family had asked me to walk them through the day. No one had wanted to hear the sequence of events, the details I now held so clearly. They had not been interested in understanding. They had been interested in closure. And closure, I was learning, often came at someone else's expense. When I returned home, I pulled out the small notebook I used for reminders and lists. On a blank page, I wrote down everything I remembered from that day, times, movements, names. It was not for anyone else. It was for me. I needed to see it all laid out, to remind myself that I was not imagining things. As I wrote, another realization settled in. Even if I explained all of this, even if I laid it out perfectly, it would not change how my family had reacted. Logic had not guided their response. Fear had. Fear of gossip, fear of conflict, fear of admitting they might have been wrong. That was when a heavier truth emerged. If I wanted answers, I would not get them by convincing my family. I would have to find them myself. The thought scared me more than I expected. I had never been someone who dug for trouble. I avoided confrontation. I believed in letting things settle, but nothing about this was settling. It was spreading. That evening, my phone buzzed again, a message from a cousin, asking if there was anything I wanted to say before people made up their minds. I stared at the screen, then set it down without replying. I was tired of explaining myself into a void. Instead, I looked back at the list I had written. One line stood out more than the others. Gift room secured, key transferred. If that was true, and I knew it was, then someone else had to be involved. Someone else had access. Someone else had stepped into that room after I walked away. The idea did not make me angry. It made me focused. For the first time since that night, I felt something other than hurt and disbelief. I felt the faint pull of direction. I did not know yet where it would lead, or what I would find, but I knew I could no longer afford to sit still. As the sun dipped below the trees outside my window, I closed the notebook and set it aside. I was not ready to confront anyone, not yet, but I was done doubting my own memory. If the truth was going to surface, it would not be because my family suddenly decided to listen. It would be because I followed the details they had chosen to ignore, one step at a time. Following those ignored details led me somewhere I had avoided thinking about for a long time. It started with a memory I had pushed aside because it felt disloyal to examine it too closely. A conversation from months before the wedding, one I had dismissed at the time as harmless, even kind. It resurfaced now with an uncomfortable weight. My Aunt Helen had always been a quiet presence in our family. She lived outside Santa Rosa, in a modest house she had owned for decades, and rarely inserted herself into family conflicts. She was in her early 80s then, sharp-minded, careful with her words, the kind of woman who listened more than she spoke. When she asked you something, it was because she had already thought it through. That afternoon, I had stopped by her house to help her sort through paperwork. She had asked me to come by because she trusted me to stay organized. Her words, not mine. We sat at her dining table, sunlight spilling across stacks of folders, the smell of coffee lingering in the air. At one point, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me for a long moment before speaking. She said she was thinking about the future, about how she wanted things handled when she was no longer around. She said she needed someone steady, someone who would not rush decisions or be swayed by impulse. She mentioned my name. At the time, I had brushed it off, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I told her she should talk to a lawyer, that these things were complicated. She smiled and said she already had, and that she was just thinking out loud. I never told anyone about that conversation. It felt private, not secret, but personal, something between two adults acknowledging trust. Now, days after the wedding, the memory sat differently. I thought about Emily, about how her relationship with money had always been tense. She earned well when things went her way, but spent quickly, impatient with limits. She had joked more than once about how unfair it was that some people had everything planned for them while others had to scramble. At the time, I had assumed she was venting, nothing more. Then there was another memory, sharper, harder to ignore. It was from earlier that year, a family dinner where Helen had been present. We had been sitting in the living room when Helen mentioned, casually, that she was getting her affairs in order. I remembered standing near the doorway when I noticed Emily pause mid-sentence, her eyes flicking toward us. She had gone quiet, listening. I had not thought much of it then. Families talk, people overhear things, but now, layered over everything else, it felt different. I wondered how much Emily had heard. I wondered what conclusions she had drawn. That afternoon, I found myself pacing my living room, replaying fragments of past conversations, glances I had ignored, comments I had shrugged off. None of them proved anything. But together, they formed a pattern I could no longer dismiss. The accusation at this wedding no longer felt spontaneous. It felt positioned, timed. Delivered in a way that left little room for doubt, I asked myself a question that made my chest tighten. What if the missing money was not the goal, but the tool? If my credibility was destroyed, if my family saw me as untrustworthy, what would that mean when bigger decisions came into play? Decisions about trust, about responsibility, about who should be relied on. The thought made me uneasy, not because I wanted to believe the worst about my sister, but because it fit too cleanly to ignore. That evening, I sat at my desk and pulled out old emails. Notes from Helen about paperwork, calendar reminders from visits I had made to her house. Nothing incriminating, nothing dramatic, just evidence of a relationship built on quiet consistency. I contrasted that with Emily's relationship with Helen, which had always been polite but distant. There had been warmth, yes, but also tension, the kind that appears when expectations and reality do not align. I realized something else then. No one in my family had mentioned Helen since the wedding. Not once. It was as if that entire thread had been quietly tucked away, too inconvenient to examine. The realization settled slowly. This was not just a family misunderstanding. It was a situation where certain truths were being actively avoided. Later that night, my phone rang again. This time, it was my mother. Her tone was tired, clipped. She said she had been thinking about how difficult this was for everyone. She said Emily was barely sleeping. She said the family needed unity. I asked her a question I had not planned to ask. I asked if she truly believed I would steal from my own sister. There was another pause. She said she did not want to speculate. She said she believed in supporting the person who had been hurt. I told her quietly that I was hurt too. She sighed and said this was exactly the kind of conversation that made things worse. She said I needed to stop focusing on myself and think about the bigger picture. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear. The bigger picture, I realized, did not include me. That night, sleep came in fragments. I dreamed of doors closing, of voices muffled just out of reach. Each time I woke, the same thought returned. If I did nothing, this story would harden into something permanent. In the days that followed, I noticed how carefully Emily shaped her narrative. She did not lash out. She did not accuse loudly. She spoke in measured tones about heartbreak and disappointment, about learning painful lessons. People responded to that. They always do. No one asked for proof. No one needed it. The story was clean, easy to understand. A trusted sister, a shocking betrayal. I began to understand that whatever had happened, the truth would not emerge on its own. It would not be discovered accidentally. Someone would have to look directly at the parts everyone else preferred to avoid. That someone, it seemed, was me. The realization did not fill me with courage. It filled me with resolve. A quiet, steady resolve that felt unfamiliar but necessary. I did not know yet where to start. I only knew that waiting for my family to reconsider was no longer an option. If there was a deeper motive, if the accusation served a purpose beyond the obvious, I needed to understand it. As I turned off the light and lay down, my mind kept circling back to one image: Emily standing in that dining room, so sure of herself, so prepared. People do not reach that kind of certainty by accident. Whatever lay beneath this accusation, it was not going to reveal itself willingly. And the longer it stayed hidden, the more damage it would do. I closed my eyes with a thought that felt both heavy and clarifying. The answers I needed were not going to come from my family. They were going to come from following the one thing that still made sense: the facts. The facts were the only thing that still felt solid. And once I accepted that, I knew I could not stay alone with them. The next morning, I called Rachel Gomez. She had been my friend for nearly 30 years, long enough to know when my voice meant something was truly wrong. I did not ease into the conversation. I told her everything, from the accusation to my mother's reaction, to the way the story had already settled into something fixed and unquestioned. Rachel listened without interrupting. She always did. When I finally stopped talking, there was a brief silence on the line, the kind that means someone is thinking carefully before they speak. She told me she was sorry. She told me it sounded unbearable. Then she asked a question so simple that it caught me off guard. She asked whether the place where the wedding was held had cameras. I remember gripping the phone tighter, my mind stumbling over the idea, as if it were something fragile. Of course it did. Most venues did these days. It was Napa Valley, not a backyard barbecue, but the thought had not crossed my mind because no one in my family had wanted answers. They had wanted closure. Rachel said that if there were cameras, then someone had recorded what happened. She said that even if the footage showed nothing unusual, it would still prove something important, that the story I was being accused of did not match reality. When we hung up, I sat very still at my kitchen table. The idea felt both obvious and daunting. I had spent days replaying memories and questioning motives, but this was different. This was tangible. I did not tell anyone where I was going. I grabbed my keys and drove toward Napa Valley, the same route I had taken so many times during the wedding planning. The vineyards looked calm in the midday sun, rows of green passing by like nothing in the world had shifted. The venue itself was quieter than it had been on the wedding day. No music, no guests. Just a few cars in the lot and the low hum of maintenance work in the distance. I sat in my car for a moment before getting out, my hands resting on the steering wheel as I steadied my breathing. Inside, I was greeted by a woman at the front desk who recognized me. She said she remembered me from the wedding, said I had been very organized. The comment landed heavier than she could have known. I explained that there had been a dispute within the family about something that happened during the reception. I kept my voice calm. I did not mention accusations or stolen money. I asked if it would be possible to review security footage from the area near the gift room. She hesitated, just for a second. Then she said she would get her supervisor. A few minutes later, Mark Ellis came out to meet me. He was in his early 50s, with the steady demeanor of someone who had handled plenty of uncomfortable requests. He asked me to explain what I was looking for. I told him I needed clarity about who had access to a specific area after the reception ended. He nodded and led me down a quiet hallway to a small office filled with monitors and filing cabinets. The air smelled faintly of coffee and paper. He pulled up a chair for me and turned one of the screens so we could both see it. As the footage loaded, my heart began to pound in a way I had not felt since the night of the accusation. I told myself to focus, to watch, not to imagine. The screen showed the hallway outside the gift room. The timestamp placed it near the end of the reception, Guests drifted past, laughing, carrying jackets, saying their goodbyes. Staff members moved in and out, collecting linens and glassware. Then I appeared on the screen. I watched myself step into view. The same dress I remembered, the same tired posture. I unlocked the door to the gift room, went inside briefly, then came back out. I closed the door and locked it. I could see my hand pause on the handle, the way it always did when I checked that something was secure. A coordinator approached me. I handed her the key. She nodded and walked away. I felt my shoulders drop slightly as I watched. There it was, exactly as I had remembered it. Mark glanced at me, then back at the screen. He fast-forwarded a bit, letting the footage play at a quicker pace. The hallway emptied. Staff finished their tasks. The door to the gift room remained closed. I asked him to keep going. He adjusted the time again, slowing it down as another figure appeared. My breath caught when I recognized her shape before her face came into focus. Emily stepped into the hallway. She looked around briefly, the way someone does when they want to be sure they are not being watched. She was not alone. A man followed a few steps behind her, someone I recognized but had never thought much about. Jason Reed. He had been around her often enough in recent months, helping with odd jobs, driving her to appointments. I had never questioned it. On the screen, Emily reached into her purse. She pulled out the key, my key, the one I had handed over. She unlocked the door. I leaned forward without realizing it. Mark slowed the footage further, his jaw tightening as he watched. Emily and Jason went inside the gift room. The door closed behind them. The next few minutes stretched longer than they should have. The screen showed only the closed door and the quiet hallway. I felt my pulse in my ears. Then the door opened again. Jason stepped out first. He adjusted his jacket in a way that made my stomach twist. I saw the outline of envelopes beneath the fabric as he tucked them more securely under his arm. Emily followed, smoothing the front of her dress, her expression composed. They did not rush. They did not panic. They walked down the hallway together and disappeared from view. I sat back in my chair, the room suddenly feeling very small. Mark broke the silence by asking if I wanted a copy of the footage. His voice was careful, respectful. I nodded. I could not trust my voice yet. As he transferred the files onto a drive, I stared at the blank screen, the images replaying themselves behind my eyes. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not chaos. This was something deliberate. Mark handed me the drive and said he was sorry I was dealing with this. He said he would make a note of the footage in case it was needed later. I thanked him, though the words felt inadequate. When I walked back outside, the sun seemed too bright. The air felt too light for what I was carrying. I sat in my car again, the drive resting in my palm like something fragile and heavy at the same time. I did not start the engine right away. I needed a moment to let the truth settle into place. Not the kind of truth that could be argued away or softened, but the kind that simply existed. For the first time since the wedding, I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, not triumph, something steadier. I had proof. What I chose to do with it would matter more than I realized then. But for now, I allowed myself to sit in the quiet and breathe. The story my family believed was no longer the only one that existed, and even if they were not ready to hear it, the facts were finally on my side. The facts were finally on my side, but knowing that did not bring the peace I expected. I drove home from Napa Valley with the memory of the footage looping in my mind. Emily reaching into her purse. Jason stepping out with the shape of envelopes under his jacket. The calm in their movements. It was not the shock that stayed with me. It was the ease. They looked like people carrying out something they had already agreed on. When I pulled into my driveway, the sky was beginning to soften into evening. I sat in the car longer than necessary, the small drive resting in my palm. Proof had weight. Not just physical weight, but moral weight. Once you have it, you cannot pretend you do not. Inside, my house felt unusually quiet. I placed the drive on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water I barely touched. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I had imagined I would be shaking, or crying, or overwhelmed. Instead, I felt focused in a way I had not felt in years. I replayed the footage on my laptop. Once, then again. Each time I noticed something new. The way Emily checked the hallway before unlocking the door. The way Jason did not hesitate. The lack of urgency. This was not a mistake made under pressure. This was a decision. As the reality settled in, another thought followed close behind. I was not just dealing with a lie. I was dealing with a narrative that had been carefully constructed, one that relied on my silence and my family trust. I thought about my mother again, about how firmly she had stood behind Emily, about the way she had spoken to me as if I were a problem to be managed. I wondered what would happen when she saw this, whether she would accept it, or find a way to explain it away to protect the version of the family she wanted to preserve. The question lingered, heavy and unresolved. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel Carter, Emily's husband. We had never been close, polite, distant, connected mostly through family gatherings and holidays. His message was brief. He asked if we could talk. I hesitated before replying. Part of me wanted to protect the quiet certainty I had just found. Another part knew that avoiding this conversation would only delay what was already coming. I told him he could come by. He arrived an hour later, standing awkwardly on my front porch, his hands clasped in front of him as if he were bracing for impact. He looked tired, not the kind of tired that comes from a long day, but the kind that comes from carrying unanswered questions. I invited him in and we sat at opposite ends of the living room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt thick with everything that had not been said since the wedding. He told me he did not know what to believe anymore. He said the story Emily told did not line up with things he had noticed before the wedding. Arguments about money, last-minute changes to the budget, her insistence that certain things were non-negotiable. He said he had pushed those concerns aside because he wanted the wedding to be perfect. I listened without interrupting. Then he asked me directly if I had taken the money. I answered just as directly. I told him no. I told him I had proof. He stiffened slightly, as if unsure whether he wanted to hear what came next. I turned my laptop toward him and plugged in the drive. I did not narrate. I did not explain. I let the footage speak. I watched his face as the video played. The confusion, the tightening of his jaw. The moment recognition set in when Emily appeared on the screen, when Jason followed her into the room. Daniel pressed his fingers to his temple, as if trying to steady himself. When the footage ended, he asked me to play it again. I did. The room was silent when it finished the second time. He stared at the blank screen for a long moment before finally speaking. He said he had suspected Emily was hiding something, but he never imagined it was this. He said the calmness of it scared him more than the act itself. He asked if anyone else had seen the video. I told him no. He nodded slowly. He said he needed time to think. He asked if he could have a copy, not to confront her immediately, he said, but to understand what he was dealing with before he made any decisions. I agreed, reminding him gently that timing mattered, that confronting her without a plan could make things worse. He understood, or at least, he thought he did. When he left, I felt a strange shift. The truth was no longer mine alone. Someone else had seen it, had absorbed it, had been changed by it. That knowledge both relieved and unsettled me. Over the next few days, my family continued as if nothing had changed. The group chat buzzed with messages about how strong Emily was being. My mother wrote about unity and forgiveness. My father echoed her sentiments. No one reached out to ask if I had anything to say. I muted the conversation. Each notification felt like a reminder of how easily the lie had taken root, how quickly people chose the story that required the least disruption. I wondered how long I could have lived with that if I had not gone to the venue, if I had not asked the one question that mattered. The thought made my stomach turn. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun dip behind the trees, my phone rang again. It was my mother. Her voice sounded strained. She said Daniel had been distant. She said Emily was upset and did not understand why. She asked if I knew anything about it. I told her I did. She waited for me to continue. I said there were things she needed to see, but not over the phone. I said this was not a conversation that could be managed or smoothed over with careful words. She bristled. She said she did not appreciate secrets. She said the family had been through enough. I told her quietly that I had been through enough too. The line went silent. When she spoke again, caught. Her tone was different, less certain. She asked me what I meant. I told her I would explain soon, in person, when everyone was present. She did not argue, but she did not agree either. She said she needed time to think. When the call ended, I knew there was no turning back. The story that had been told about me was about to be challenged, and not everyone would welcome that. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind kept running ahead, imagining the moment when the truth would enter a room full of people who had already decided who I was. I did not know how my mother would react, or my father, or Emily. I only knew that the silence that had protected the lie was about to break. As dawn crept in through the window, I made a decision that felt both heavy and necessary. I would not argue. I would not plead. I would not defend myself with emotion. I would let the facts stand on their own. The rest would be out of my control. And for the first time since the wedding, that felt acceptable. Letting the facts stand did not mean the waiting became easier. The days that followed moved with an uncomfortable slowness, as if time itself was stretching the space between what I knew and what everyone else believed. Daniel had seen the footage, but he had not acted on it yet, and I understood why. Discovering that the person you married is capable of something like that does not come with a manual. You do not wake up the next morning knowing what to do. We spoke once more, briefly, 2 days after he left my house. He told me he had not confronted Emily. He said he needed to observe her, to listen, to see if the calm certainty she had shown in the footage surfaced elsewhere. His voice sounded distant, careful, like someone walking across thin ice. I told him I understood, and I did. After we hung up, I felt the weight of isolation settle in again, different this time. I was no longer doubting myself, but I was still standing alone in a family that had already closed ranks. Knowing the truth does not instantly give you belonging back. Sometimes it takes it even further away. My mother did not call again that week. Neither did my father. The group chat remained active, filled with small updates about Emily trying to stay strong, about how hard it was to move forward after betrayal. I watched the messages appear and disappear on my screen without opening them. I had muted the sound, but the vibration still found me. One afternoon, I ran into a neighbor while checking the mail. She asked how the wedding had gone. I smiled politely and said it was beautiful. I did not correct the version of the story she probably already knew. I was learning when silence was a shield and when it was a surrender. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the laptop open in front of me, the drive resting beside it. I did not play the video again. I did not need to. I knew exactly what it showed. What I was thinking about instead was timing. Truth delivered too early is dismissed. Truth delivered too late becomes irrelevant. I needed to find the moment when it would be impossible to ignore. I thought about my mother's words, about how she had said families survived by standing together. I realized she was right, just not in the way she meant. Families survive on shared reality. Once that breaks, everything else becomes performance. The idea of calling everyone together began to form slowly, not as a confrontation, but as a pause. A moment where no one could hide behind messages or assumptions. A space where the facts could exist in the same room as the people who had avoided them. The thought made my stomach tighten. I had never been the one to call family meetings. That role usually fell to my mother, sometimes my father. Stepping into it felt like crossing an invisible line. I walked into the living room and sat down, letting myself imagine the scene. My parents at the table, Emily sitting with that familiar composure, Daniel somewhere between them, already changed by what he had seen. I pictured myself placing the laptop down without saying much at all. I did not feel fear when I imagined it. I felt clarity. The next morning, Daniel called me. He said he had spent the night thinking. He said he could not unsee what he had seen. He told me Emily had asked him why he was being distant. He had not answered. He asked me what I planned to do. I told him the truth. I said I was thinking about asking everyone to come together. I said I was not interested in arguing or defending myself anymore. I wanted the facts to speak, and then I wanted to step away. There was a pause on the line. Then he said he would be there, not to support me publicly, he clarified, but to witness the truth in the open, to hear what Emily would say when she could not control the narrative. That mattered more than he realized. After we hung up, I sat quietly, absorbing the shift. Someone else was now willing to stand in the same room with the truth. Even if he did not yet know where he stood, he was no longer hiding from it. I drafted a message to the family group chat. Short, neutral. I wrote that I wanted to have dinner together at my parents' house in Sacramento. I said I had something important to share and that it was better done in person. I did not explain. I did not defend. I did not ask for forgiveness. My mother replied first. She asked if this meant I was ready to be honest. My father added that he hoped I understood how much damage had been done. Emily responded with a message about hoping this would bring closure. I did not reply to any of them. That night, I gathered everything I needed. I backed up the footage. I printed still images with timestamps, not because I wanted to overwhelm anyone, but because I refused to be told later that something had been misunderstood. Preparation was not about revenge. It was about control. As I worked, I noticed how steady I felt. The shaking I had expected never came. I was not angry. I was not eager. I was resolved. For years, I had believed that keeping the peace meant stepping back, smoothing things over, letting others take the lead. Now I saw how easily that instinct could be used against me. Before going to bed, I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cool, the street quiet. I thought about how strange it was that the most destabilizing moments of life often happen indoors, around familiar tables, among people who know your name. I knew the dinner would not restore what had been lost. There were things that could not be repaired by explanations or apologies. But it would mark an end to guessing, an end to carrying the lie alone. As I turned off the porch light and went back inside, one thought stayed with me, calm and unshakable. Whatever happened next, I would no longer be invisible in my own story. Walking into my parents' house that evening felt like stepping into a place I knew by heart and no longer recognized at the same time. The familiar smell of roast chicken and warm bread filled the air, the same meal my mother had made for decades, whenever she wanted things to feel normal. The table was set carefully, placemats aligned, silverware straightened more than necessary. It was the kind of order she created when she was bracing for something difficult. Everyone was already there when I arrived. My father sat at the head of the table, his hands folded, his expression tight. My mother moved between the kitchen and the dining room, avoiding my eyes as she adjusted dishes that did not need adjusting. Emily sat near the center, her posture composed, her face arranged into something calm and wounded at the same time. Daniel stood near the window for a moment before taking his seat, his presence quieter than usual. I greeted them all with a nod and took the chair I had chosen deliberately, one that allowed me to see everyone without being boxed in. No one asked how I was. My mother asked if I wanted water. I said no. Dinner began with small talk that barely held together. My father commented on traffic. My mother mentioned the weather. Emily spoke softly about how exhausting the past week had been. Each word landed with a careful distance, as if everyone was afraid to say the wrong thing too soon. I ate slowly. Though I barely tasted the food, I waited. Not because I was unsure, but because timing mattered. When the plates were cleared and my mother brought out coffee, the room settled into a heavier quiet. This was the moment I had imagined so many times that it no longer felt foreign. I placed my laptop on the table. My mother froze mid-step. She asked what that was about. Her voice carried the edge of irritation she used when she felt control slipping. I told her there was something I needed them to see. I said I was not there to argue or explain. I said I would let the facts speak for themselves. Emily shifted in her chair. She said she did not understand why we were doing this again. She said she wanted to move forward. I did not respond. I opened the laptop and connected the drive. The room grew very still as the video began to play. The screen showed the hallway outside the gift room at the venue in Napa Valley. The timestamp was clear. Guests walked past. Staff moved through their tasks. No one spoke. I watched my parents' faces instead of the screen. My father leaned forward slightly. My mother clasped her hands together, her knuckles whitening as the footage continued. Then I appeared on the screen. I saw myself unlock the door, step inside briefly, then come back out. I locked the door and handed the key to the coordinator. It was all there, plain and unremarkable. The kind of moment no one notices unless they are looking for it. My mother inhaled sharply. My father said nothing. The footage moved on. Emily's eyes were fixed on the screen now, her expression tightening in a way I had never seen before. When her image appeared, stepping into the hallway, the air in the room shifted. Daniel straightened in his chair. The video showed Emily looking around, reaching into her purse, pulling out the key. It showed her unlocking the door. Jason followed her inside. The door closed. No one spoke. When the door opened again and Jason stepped out, adjusting his jacket with the unmistakable outline of envelopes beneath the fabric, My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Emily began to speak, her words tumbling over each other, saying there was more to it, saying it was not what it looked like. She said something about misunderstanding and pressure and needing help. The footage continued without pause, indifferent to explanations. When it ended, I closed the laptop. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. My father asked if the video was real. His voice sounded unsteady, unfamiliar. I told him it was. My mother looked at Emily, then at me, then back again. She asked why she had never seen this before. I told her calmly that no one had asked. Emily tried to regain control, saying the money had been taken for safekeeping, that Jason had been helping her because she was overwhelmed. Her explanations shifted even as she spoke them, changing shape in ways that contradicted themselves. Daniel finally spoke. He said he had seen the footage already. He said he could not ignore what it showed. His voice was low, controlled, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. My mother turned to him, shock breaking through her composure. She asked why he had not said anything sooner. He said he needed to understand it himself before saying anything at all. The room felt smaller with each passing second. I did not add commentary. I did not point out inconsistencies. I did not accuse. I sat quietly, my hands folded, letting the evidence occupy the space it deserved. My father asked Emily directly why she had said I was the only one with access to the room. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said she had panicked. She said she had been afraid of losing everything. My mother's voice rose, asking everything, asking how this could have happened, asking why she had been made to look like a fool. That was the moment I saw the shift. Not toward me, but away from certainty. The confidence my mother had carried for weeks cracked, just enough to reveal confusion underneath. I spoke then for the first time since the video ended. I said I had not come there to fix anything. I said I had come to stop being the person everyone blamed because it was easier than asking questions. I said I would not stay and defend myself further. My mother looked at me as if she were seeing me clearly, for the first time in a long while. She asked what I meant by that. I told her I meant exactly what I said. I gathered my things slowly, deliberately. No one stopped me. My father sank back into his chair. Emily stared at the table. Daniel remained still, his gaze distant. At the door, my mother called my name. Her voice was softer now, uncertain. I turned, waiting. She did not apologize. She did not explain. She simply said she needed time. I nodded. That was the most honest thing she had said all evening. Outside, the night air felt cool and clean. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, the hum of distant traffic, the quiet lives continuing beyond the walls of that house. I knew the truth had landed. I knew nothing would be the same. And as I walked to my car, I understood something else with surprising clarity. What came next would not be about proving anything anymore. It would be about deciding what I was willing to carry forward and what I was finally ready to leave behind. Leaving my parents' house did not bring the relief I had imagined, but it did bring something steadier. The drive home felt different this time. The streets were the same, the traffic lights familiar, but I was no longer replaying conversations in my head, wondering what I should have said differently. What needed to be seen had been seen. What needed to be heard had been heard, even if not everyone was ready to accept it. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat for a moment with the engine off, listening to the ticking sound as it cooled. I felt tired in a deep way, the kind that comes after holding yourself together for too long, but beneath it was a quiet certainty. I had done what I came to do. Inside, the house was still. I set my keys down and walked through each room, turning on a lamp here, another there, grounding myself in the familiar rhythm of my own space. For weeks, everything had felt temporary, as if I were waiting for permission to exist again. That feeling was gone now. The next morning, my phone rang early. It was Daniel. His voice sounded flat, worn. He said he had barely slept. He said Emily had cried through the night, moving between anger and pleading, insisting that everything had gotten out of hand. He said none of it explained what he had seen. He told me he had asked her directly why she accused me so quickly, so confidently. She had said she panicked, that she thought blaming me would buy her time to figure things out. Time, I noticed, was always the word people used when they meant control. Daniel said he had told her he needed space. Not a conversation, not counseling, not reassurances. Space. I told him I understood, and I did. There are moments when clarity makes everything else impossible to tolerate. After we hung up, I stood by the kitchen window and watched the morning unfold. A neighbor walked her dog. A delivery truck pulled up 2 houses down. Life continued, steady and indifferent to personal collapse. Later that day, my mother called. Her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. She did not start with an accusation or a question. She started with a sigh. She said she had not known what to think after I left. She said she kept replaying the video in her mind. She asked me why I had not come to her sooner. I answered honestly. I said I had tried to speak the night of the wedding. I said no one had wanted to hear me then. I said I had learned the hard way that timing mattered more than truth. There was a long silence on the line. She said she felt humiliated. She said she could not believe she had defended something that was not real. She said she did not recognize her own judgment anymore. I listened without interrupting. This time, it was not my job to reassure her. She said she was sorry. The word landed softly, not with the force people imagine apologies carry, but with a weight that felt uncertain and incomplete. I thanked her for saying it. I did not say everything was fine. It was not. In the days that followed, the family dynamic shifted in small, uneven ways. Some relatives reached out quietly, offering awkward apologies, telling me they should have asked questions. Others said nothing at all. A few continued to act as if the situation were simply unfortunate. No one's fault. Better left behind. Emily did not contact me. I heard about her through fragments. That she was not going out much. That she felt betrayed by everyone now. That she did not understand how things had gone so wrong. I noticed how often her version of betrayal still centered on herself. Daniel moved out of their house the following week. He did not make a public announcement. He simply did it, quietly, efficiently, the way people do when they have reached a conclusion they do not need to explain. I thought about reaching out to him once, just to check in, but decided against it. He had his own reckoning to navigate. I had mine. As the weeks passed, I felt something inside me loosen, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but the release of responsibility. I was no longer carrying the burden of fixing what I had not broken. I spent more time in my own routines. I took longer walks. I cooked meals I enjoyed instead of rushing through them. I sat on my porch in the evenings and let the quiet settle around me. For the first time since the wedding, I felt fully present in my own life. One afternoon, I received a letter from my Aunt Helen. Her handwriting was careful, slightly shaky. She wrote that she had heard there had been trouble in the family and that she hoped I was well. She said she trusted me and always had. She said she did not need explanations. I held that letter for a long time after reading it. Some forms of validation arrive quietly, without spectacle or demands. They mean more because of it. My parents and I spoke occasionally, cautiously. There were pauses in our conversations where old patterns tried to reassert themselves, where my mother almost slipped back into managing the narrative instead of sitting with the discomfort. Each time, I chose not to fill the silence for her. It was not my job anymore. One evening, as I organized papers at my desk, I came across the printed still images from the footage. I studied them for a moment, then placed them in a folder and tucked it away. I did not feel the need to look at them again. They had done their work. I thought about how easily my life could have taken a different turn if I had not asked one simple question. If I had accepted the version of myself my family was willing to believe. The thought unsettled me, but it also strengthened my resolve. The truth had not given me my family back. It had given me myself. As autumn settled in, the air grew cooler, the days shorter. I found comfort in the rhythm of it, in the reminder that change is not always loud or sudden. Sometimes it arrives quietly, reshaping things over time. One night, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, the house wrapped in a soft hush. I realized that for the first time in months, I was not bracing for the next phone call or message. I was not waiting for someone else's reaction to determine how I felt. That, more than anything else, felt like freedom. I knew there would be more conversations ahead, more moments of reckoning. Healing does not follow a straight line, but the direction was clear now. What had collapsed was not my reputation, but a story that never belonged to me. And in the quiet that followed its fall, I was beginning to understand what it meant to choose peace without waiting for permission. The quiet that followed did not feel empty anymore. It felt earned. In the weeks after everything settled, my life took on a steadier rhythm. Not the old rhythm of waiting for approval or smoothing over tension, but something slower and more deliberate. I woke up without the familiar knot in my stomach. I moved through my days without bracing for the next conversation. The absence of constant vigilance was something I had not realized I was missing until it was gone. My parents and I continued to speak, though differently than before. Our conversations were careful, respectful, and shorter than they once had been. My mother tried at times to slip back into the role of managing everything, of steering the conversation toward reassurance and normalcy. When that happened, I did not correct her. I simply let the silence sit until she adjusted. It was uncomfortable, but it was honest. One afternoon, she invited me over for coffee. Just coffee. No agenda. No apology wrapped in explanations. When I arrived, she hugged me longer than usual, her arms tight around my shoulders. I noticed how small she felt, how much older than I remembered. We sat at the kitchen table where so many decisions had been made without me. She talked about small things, the garden, a neighbor who had moved away, a recipe she had been trying to perfect. Eventually, she stopped and looked at me. She said she was still trying to understand how she had been so sure she was right. She said it frightened her to realize how easily she had chosen a version of events that required the least disruption. She said she did not know how to fix what she had broken. I told her something I had not planned to say. I told her that fixing it was not the point, that what mattered now was whether she could sit with the discomfort of knowing she had been wrong without trying to erase it. She nodded slowly. I could tell she was not there yet, but she was listening. That was enough. Emily remained distant. I heard from others that she was angry, then defensive, then quiet. The arc was familiar, the slow realization that a story no longer worked when too many people had seen behind it. I did not reach out, not out of spite, but out of clarity. Some bridges collapsed because they were built on unstable ground. Daniel and I exchanged one last conversation a few months later. He thanked me for not pushing him, for letting him find his own footing in the aftermath. He said he was learning to trust his instincts again. I wished him well and meant it. As for me, I found myself returning to things I had set aside over the years, long walks in the early morning, books I had meant to read but never made time for, dinners cooked slowly, with intention. I reconnected with friends who had known me long before I learned to shrink myself for the sake of harmony. One evening, I pulled the folder with the evidence from a drawer and placed it on the table. I opened it, not to revisit the pain, but to acknowledge the journey. Then I closed it and put it back. I did not need it anymore. The truth had done its work. What surprised me most was how little satisfaction I felt about being proven right. There was no triumph in it, no sense of victory. Instead, there was a calm acceptance that sometimes justice does not come with applause. Sometimes it arrives quietly, changing the way you stand in your own life. I thought often about the night of the wedding, about how quickly everything had unraveled. I realized now that the accusation itself had been less damaging than what followed it. The real wound had been the willingness to believe it without question. The real lesson had been learning that love without trust is fragile. As the year turned, I made choices that felt aligned rather than reactive. I set boundaries without explanations. I declined invitations that felt obligatory. I said yes to things that brought me peace, even when they did not make sense to anyone else. One afternoon, as I sat on my porch watching the light change, I asked myself a question I had avoided for a long time. If this had never happened, who would I still be trying to please? The answer came easily, and it startled me. I smiled then, not because everything was resolved, but because I finally understood something fundamental. My worth had never been tied to my family agreement with me. It had always existed on its own. That realization did not erase the loss, but it put it into perspective. I had lost a version of family that depended on my silence. What I gained was a relationship with myself that did not. If you are listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own life in it, I want to leave you with a question that stayed with me long after the dust settled. When the people closest to you believe a story that hurts you, do you keep fighting to be understood, or do you choose to step back and protect the quiet truth you know about yourself? I would love to hear how you would handle that moment, or if you have faced something similar in your own life. Your perspective matters, and sometimes sharing it helps someone else realize they are not alone. Thank you for staying with me through this story, and if you want to hear more journeys like this one, I hope you will stay connected.